Welcome to the Science of Mind Health, a podcast where we explore the vital connection between how we move, how we live, and how we think. I'm your host, Daniel, and I created this show out of a deep curiosity for cognitive science and a passion for the practical strategies that support long-term mind health. Today's episode is all about the spaces we live in and how thoughtful design can profoundly shape our brain health, movement, and quality of life, especially for those living with dementia. To help unpack these ideas, I'm joined by Kershin, a registered architect with a master's degree in both architecture and landscape architecture. Her perspective is deeply personal because her father lived with somatic dementia, and through his journey, she saw powerful parallels between cognitive decline and childhood development. Drawing from both her professional expertise and family experience, Kershing offers moving insights into how the spaces we create can nurture independence and long-term mind health. So Kershing, thank you for being here, and let's dive into the questions.
Thanks.
So my first question is, in your article you wrote, I have watched my father regress into infanthood whilst my three children emerged from it. Can you share what it felt like to witness those mirrored life stages?
Yeah, it was a time in my life when I was a young mother and my kids, so I have kids that range in age, 8 years across the oldest and the youngest. And so I was watching them kind of start out life, as infants and then kind of growing older and learning language and learning how to kind of express themselves and to navigate the world. And at the same time, my father, who was, probably the most kind of capable person that I knew, um, was suffering from semantic dementia, and he was losing his ability to express himself and to navigate the world by himself. And so it was just this very poignant crossroads when I noticed that kids are coming out of infancy as, my father was in a way regressing into infancy because, and this is something I learned when I was trying to write this article, is that the word infant is actually from the Latin infans, which means unable to speak. So it was quite literally, both there was a kind of like a parallel, but in opposite directions kind of journey in and out of infancy. Yeah, and it hit me very hard. I also noticed that there were many parallels in the physical world that they inhabited, in that, I'm sure, like with little kids, they have a lot of toys to kind of keep them occupied, right? Like fidget toys, or they have to use soft spoons to eat. And, as my father his dementia was progressing, he also started to need fidget toys and having soft spoons to eat. So it was not just in the way that they behaved, but also in the physical environment around them. There were parallels.
Actually, I can relate to that because I remember my uncle saying when my grandma first got dementia that her brain is slowly turning into a child's brain. So I personally felt that sentence in the article was like really powerful.
Yeah.
So for listeners unfamiliar with it, what is semantic dementia and how did it first show up in your father's life?
So semantic means to do with language and logic, right? So semantic dementia occurs first in the frontotemporal lobe of your brain, and it's the part of your brain that can deal with reasoning and language. And so my father started to lose words first. He started to lose words, and he started to lose also the kind of connection between a word and its meaning. So he loved golf. It was his most favorite kind of pastime. And so one of the things we first noticed was that he started to call every instrument, every tool, every utensil a club. And so like we started to realize that actually something was happening in that part of his brain that linked things towards. And of course, eventually, all dementias become the same, as in it takes over your whole brain. So, once it's kind of past a certain point, it's no longer just about words and logic and becomes about every part of your life.
Yeah. What are the earliest and often overlooked signs of cognitive decline?
Well, so I can't really speak in generalities because I'm not an expert in dementia per se, and I think it really differs depending on different types of dementia, like how it first shows up. Um, but I think the key is really paying attention to changes. And that's where, it's really important for family and close friends to pay attention and to keep each other in check. So if you notice that if you know somebody very well and you know that their habits and their kind of the way that they would normally react to a situation, if that changes, I think that's already indicating, you know, perhaps like just be careful and watch out. Um, one thing that I've learned recently is that it's really important to check on all your senses because sensory input is really important in kind of not accelerating cognitive decline. So if you find that you're starting to get hard of hearing, it's important to deal with that, because the moment you allow that to deteriorate, and you're no longer getting so much kind of auditory stimulus, it actually can contribute to a faster decline. Yeah. So it's I think it's a very complicated question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any specific moments, like perhaps in daily routines or family interactions, that made you realize his cognitive changes were accelerating?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier on like personality changes. I think that's one of those things, like um I just thought my father was no longer interested in my life.
Oh,
Because he was actually focusing really hard on trying to remember things, in his own life and his own kind of daily activities. So he would kind of talk to me a lot less about my life. And it's easy to kind of take it personally, right? And be like, oh, my dad no longer cares about me. But actually, something else was happening.
how has your experience with your father shaped the way that you think about aging and memory in your own life?
Ah, I think it's made me a lot more acutely aware of how important it is to pay attention to one's cognitive kind of stamina and fitness. It's very easy to think about your body, right? You can kind of see if your muscles are wasting away, and it's easy to see if you're like putting on weight or, you know, that kind of stuff because it's very visible. But with the brain, I think it's much, much harder, and you really have to rely on other people to kind of point things out. So I try now to basically do things that challenge me, like I do a lot more like writing, for example. I hate writing. I hate it. Like it actually, I find it physically like hurts my brain when I have to sit down and write, but I force myself to do it because I think it's a way of kind of staving off complacency and like, allowing parts of my brain to rot. So I do things like that. And I think taking challenges, things that make you a little bit afraid. Yeah. So I do that now.
That's great. Um, in what ways can architecture either support or hinder brain health, especially for those living with dementia?
And so this is a great question. I mean, I really believe through my work. So I'm an architect, right? And I do a lot of work for inclusive design. So basically, we design spaces for people who might be neurodivergent or who are um, have dementia, right? Or say for kids that when we want to have neurotypical and neuroatypical kids to be learning in the same environment, like those kinds of projects. And so we really know that the environment has a strong impact on how people behave and feel. And so this, is something that I've been trying to kind of study more as well. In basically after we make projects, we'll go round again and basically observe people in them and kind of interview people who use them to kind of understand what the impact really is. And I think, you know, for people with dementia, it's really important on the one hand to keep the environment very clear, very legible, so that they know exactly like where they're meant to be or like, where they can go within a space. But at the same time, it needs to also be challenging. It cannot be, what I said earlier on about keeping your brain stimulated. I think that's really, really important. There's a wonderful nursing home in Japan called Mizumi. It's outside of Tokyo. And I think about, I don't know, like 5 to 10 years ago, maybe there was a documentary that came out about it called I Dream of Mizumi. And it was so kind of like paradigm changing for a lot of people because in this, it's basically like a nursing home. And in this nursing home, it has all kinds of things that you would not expect to have in an old age home. So the ground, right, the floor is completely covered in signs. So there's like Japanese letters and signs all over the place, and it looks incredibly messy. But the point of it is to keep the people who are there like engaged. They're always looking and trying to understand what's happening in their environment. And then they hang things from the ceiling so that if they're always looking down, they'll bump into it. So it forces them to also look up. So they have to be a lot more kind of engaged with their environment, always kind of aware. And like instead of having railings on the stairs, they have a rope. So they have to be a lot more intentional with the way that they climb up and down the stairs. So, I mean, I think that is an amazing example of how a space shouldn't be outright dangerous, but it should be challenging as well. Yeah, and that helps to kind of keep the brain, like keep your brain active.
How do you ensure that dementia-friendly designs remain respectful?
I think it's really important to allow somebody with dementia as far as possible to retain their independence, and their autonomy, which means to don't take away choice. Um, so it's really about making sure that the environment, while not outright dangerous, as I mentioned earlier on, you don't remove all risk and you don't remove choice. So for example, we designed a hospice daycare center. So hospice is for people who have less than 1 year left to live. And there are some people with dementia who also qualify for hospice. And in that kind of situation, normally, like you'd be so worried about the health of these people, right? Because they only have 1 year left to live. And so in a lot of hospice daycare centers, you would put all the patients in one room so that all the nurses can look at them at all times and make sure that they're always safe. But that's kind of a miserable way to spend the last year of your life, right? So in this particular daycare center, we made sure that there was lots of choice. There was a hair salon, there was a nail spa, there was like a yoga room, there was like a cafe, and there's a horticulture, center, and there are little spaces for them to sit by themselves and bigger spaces for them to sit with other people. And it meant that it was actually very hard to keep everyone in the same space. And it was hard to know exactly where everybody was at any point in time. But it helped to make sure that people retained their independence in how they chose to spend their day. So that's an example of how I think it's important to design for dementia or for old age.
Yeah. And what are three small, low-cost changes people can make in their own homes to better support a loved one's mind, health, and mobility?
So this is the topic of a book that we made called Hack Care. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's something that anyone can download for free. It's on hackcare.org. And the point here was that, you asked me earlier on about like what are the top signs of kind of cognitive decline or whatever. And I mentioned that it really depends on the person. So what we try to do here is because dementia is so unique, depending, at least at the beginning, depending on what that person was like before and what kind of dementia they have, that it's really important that the people at home have the kind of ability to adjust the homes as needed. So I wouldn't say it's the same thing for everybody. And so we use this book to basically explain that principle and to give examples of what kinds of changes one might need to make. But I think the key thing is really to maintain routine as much as possible. So like the patient, the person's routine. So not to disrupt that too much and to keep that person rooted in family life is really important. So I would say to make sure that they can have the same kind of movement through their home as they had before, right? And because there is a cognitive decline, it's important to do things like if you had, say, like a chipped tile, and there's always a danger of somebody cutting themselves on that tile. It's you better fix that tile now because you know that your loved one may not be able to kind of pay attention to that in the future. So I would fix all the broken things and make sure that, you know, daily necessities remain, or access to daily necessities remain easy. So like if there's a mug that they like to use, like make sure that that's easy enough to reach. Um, Minimize fall risk. So check for slippery surfaces, tripping hazards, install grab bars. Um, yeah, and then, you know, download the book to kind of get an idea of how one should start thinking about it because there's always these small things you need to do. And you asked about kind of low cost. I think there are a lot of low cost things one can do. Yeah. It's just about kind of observing and taking action.
Yeah. How can society better support caregivers of dementia patients?
So I think the best thing to do is to have an ability to talk about it. So how can society better support caregivers? I think having forums to talk about basically what you're going through because there's nothing like community support. And I think in these forums, whether it's a WhatsApp group or whether it's like a regular kind of, once every 2 weeks kind of, coffee, it's the ability to kind of share really practical tips, so that like, for example, I mean, nobody likes to talk about it because it's horrible to deal with, but like, um, once somebody with dementia becomes incontinent and they're always kind of soiling their bed, like what are ways to deal with that? Like at 3 a.m. when you're like really, really tired, like what are some things that you can do? And I think it's amazing when you can share these problems as a caregiver with another caregiver and you can kind of understand what they went through and how they deal with it. Um, that's always very helpful.
And last question, looking back, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone who is just starting to support a loved one with dementia?
So I think there's a horrible statistic, right? It's like 1 in 3 people will have dementia by 2050 or something like that.
Yeah, I think I've read that.
Yeah. So while it's a horrible statistic, it also means that there are a lot more people in the world who are sharing this experience with you. Yeah. And so what I had said, sorry, what I had said earlier on about um community, I think it's really important just to seek advice, to talk to others and to understand what you can control and what you can't. And maybe on a kind of more personal note, because my father passed away 2 years ago after suffering for many, many years, like more than 15 years, is that allow allow yourself to grieve, because even when that person is alive, because I think it's one of those horrible illnesses. It's not like something where you can see somebody physically wasting away. At least at the beginning, they look exactly the same, but inside they're completely changing, and you're losing them on the inside. And so I think it's very confusing. It's like a lot of cognitive dissonance for the caregiver, for the family. And so it's very, I think, common to just like to put on a brave face and just kind of deal with it, but you don't allow yourself, or I certainly didn't allow myself to really kind of grieve the loss of my father while he was still physically around. But I think that it's important to do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. A huge thank you to you for, sharing your journey and insights. I've been your host, Daniel, and we'll see you next episode with more amazing speakers.
Thank you.
Uh, yeah. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with everything.
Yeah. Good luck to you as well.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.